Hello, and welcome to the Mathematicians Podcast, the podcast where we follow the fascinating stories behind the figures that count in the history of mathematics. I'm Benjamin Cornish, and today we look at the life and work of a man whom we owe a great deal of credit by keeping some major works of maths alive. He was head of the Alexandrian school, and like all good teachers, he made the mathematicians show their workings. I used to have a friend who collected generic cryptozoological trading cards. I won't say their name until they decide to sponsor the show. My friend had over 1,000 generic cryptozoological trading cards, which he kept in a special binder of individually wrapped plastic wrappers. He was particularly proud of the generic cryptozoological trading cards which had been printed with holographic segments that shined in the light. These, the fan base called shinies. Many of the generic cryptozoological trading cards came from the original print series of the first 150 generic cryptozoological fighting beasts. These were some of the ones that I remember from my own childhood. He had at least 100 generic yellow electric rabbits, the look-at-yourselves, to give them their generic cryptozoological name. But beyond our shared childhood, when I had stopped paying attention to generic cryptozoological trading cards, he had continued to collect and had nearly one of every generic cryptozoological trading card that had ever been printed. I used to think that he was a bit eccentric to waste his money on pieces of paper. I would say they're not worth the ink they're printed out of, but as we all know, ink is more expensive than gold. The funny thing was that one day the generic cryptozoological trading card printing company's warehouse burnt down. Luckily, no one was hurt, which allows me to classify it as a funny thing, but the result of this is that many of the original print plates for the first series of generic cryptozoological trading cards had been lost, and thus they were unable to ever print more of those specific generic cryptozoological trading cards. Suddenly, my friend was holding a piece of history, with his complete collection of generic cryptozoological trading cards. What's interesting is that no one else had really bothered to collect the early generic cryptozoological trading cards, as they were considered worthless and boring compared to the new shiny cards. So, in some cases, my friend held the only copy of a generic cryptozoological fighting beast. He could easily have sold these for a few million quid, if he chose, but instead he decided to set the cards in resin to preserve them indefinitely and donate them to a museum so that everyone could enjoy looking at a cartoon drawing of a generic cryptozoological fighting beast. And the whole world thanked him for it. We don't have a great deal to say about Eutocius' upbringing. He was born around 480 CE in a town of Ascalon. Today it's called Tel Ashkelon, and it currently resides in Israel. Back then, it was part of the Roman province of Palestina Prima, which just means First Palestine. Curiously enough, Palestine comes from a Greek word for wrestler. I think I'm safe to say that this is not our first Israeli mathematician, as the town did not become part of the territory of the modern state of Israel until about 1948, when they bombed the inhabitants into submission and exported the civilian population to Gaza for the next 75 years. Although the town itself was never part of the Herodian kingdom of Israel under Roman rule either, as it remained an independent city-state. But also, we can't say this is our first Palestinian mathematician, because the city itself was a colony city of the Greeks and later Romans. Eutocius could possibly have been Jewish, but it's most likely he was just another Roman Christian, like the majority of our mathematicians recently. Although Ascalon does give us an interesting glimpse into the heritage of a place. Who gets to claim Eutocius as one of ours, you might wonder? Well, most likely young mathematicians of Israel, or whatever becomes left of Palestine, will probably not be fighting over his history, because he isn't one of those big names. But I like to think that his heritage belongs to us all, without the need for cultural, ethnic, or national divide. Although, don't listen to me, I'm just another middle-aged white dude who decided to start a podcast. Speaking of which, today's episode is sponsored by middle-aged white men. Thank you guys. Your services really push humanity forwards. So, Eutocius as a mathematician was possibly a student of Isidorus, whom we discussed last week. Although this is only due to a citation at the end of one of Eutocius's commentaries on the sphere and cylinder, Book 2, where it is written, "The edition was revised by Isidorus of Miletus, the mechanical engineer, our teacher." However, it's also argued that this was inserted by a later scribe, as it would contradict Eutocius's other work, where he suggests he is a student of Ammonius. We did not discuss Ammonius, as he is less of a mathematician, but he was the student of Proclus. Proclus is also a big name, but also not a mathematician. But in the genealogy of who taught whom, it's nice to see that Eutocius has some good pedigree. In Book 1 of On the Sphere and Cylinder, he writes a preface to Ammonius to bear with him if he should have erred through youth. He explains that he found no satisfactory commentaries on Archimedes before his own time and promises further elucidation of the master if his work should meet with approval from Ammonius. Like Proclus and Ammonius, Eutocius went on to head up the school at Alexandria. I don't have dates, but we discussed last week that Isidorus also taught there, so they were quite possibly colleagues. And there he dedicated his life to collecting works of mathematics, copying them into more modern parchment and writing commentaries to explain the meaning of what is now 1,000-year-old Greek. You can still buy a copy of Eutocius's commentary to On the Sphere and Cylinder. It's about £42 for a digital copy. But I shall quote from the summary of Book 1. "As I found that no one before us had written down a proper treatise on the books of Archimedes on sphere and cylinder, and seeing that this has not been overlooked because of the ease of the propositions, for they require, as you know, precise attention as well as intelligent insight, I desired, as best I could, to set out clearly those things in it which are difficult to understand. And I was more led to do this by the fact that no one had yet taken up this project, then I was deterred by its difficulty, as I was also reasoning in the Socratic manner that, with God's support, most probably we shall reach the end of my efforts. And third, I thought that, even if through my youth something will strike out of tune, this will be made right by your scientific comprehension of philosophy in general, and especially of mathematics. And so I dedicate it to you, Ammonius, the best of philosophers. It would be fitting that you help my effort, and if the book seems to you slight, then do not allow it to go from yourself to anyone else. But if it has not strayed completely off the mark, make your view upon it clear, for, if it comes to be established by your own judgment, I shall try to explicate some other of the Archimedes treatise." Whew, that was only about 2 sentences, by the way. Credit to Reveal Nets for the translation there. I believe we spoke of this work by Archimedes way back, but to remind you of it, this is where he proved several mathematical formulae of mensuration that have now become standard for high school maths. The surface of a sphere is 4 times its greatest circle. The volume of a sphere is 2/3 the volume of the smallest cylinder that can contain it, but also that the surface areas of the cylinder and sphere too follow this 2/3 ratio. Now, these are not in the standard formula books that we use in school, but I think we can all agree they're a lot more cool. Eutocius also wrote a commentary of Archimedes' work, Measurement of a Circle. This, I can't imagine, would have taken long, given that the work only consists of 3 propositions. This is because it is only part of a larger work, although as far as I can tell, we have lost a lot of this larger collection. These 3 propositions are small enough that I can read them all out. So the first one, the area of any circle is equal to a right-angled triangle in which one of the sides about the right angle is equal to the radius and the other to the circumference of the circle. Any circle with a circumference c and a radius r is equal in area with a right-angled triangle with 2 legs being c and r. The text then goes on to prove this using the method of exhaustion. Notice the capital T on the, He did not demonstrate this with every possible radius of a circle, but rather used an approximation of ever-decreasing errors to show the equality of the two things at a limit, something that I have now been in 3 arguments on Reddit and 2 in real life, claiming demonstrates an earliest case of calculus. To explain proposition 1 to you, if you take a circle and roll it on a table for a single rotation, then draw up a triangle from the length travelled on the table up to the centre of the circle and back to the start of the roll, this forms a right-angled triangle with an equal area to the circle. And this is because the circumference is 2 pi r, and the formula for a triangle is area is a half base times height. So we have a method of squaring the circle that does not rely on knowing the value of pi. It is beautifully efficient, but it does not conform to the standards of Euclidean geometry because it uses the geometry of motion rather than static geometry, which puts it in the same category as lesser disciplines like astronomy or business studies. I will skip the second proposition for now, but the third proposition says the ratio of the circumference of any circle to its diameter is greater than 3 and 10 over 71, but less than 3 and 1 over 7. You might remember we discussed this a while ago. The result comes from the inscriptions and circumscriptions of polygons within and without a circle up to a 96gon. A 96gon is not a necessary place to finish the calculation, but it is a pleasing amount, given the fractions of 10 over 71 and 1 over 7. Sadly, this is less pleasing in the original Greek, as they used a 27-part numerical cipher. So 1 over 7 would have been something like zeta prime, where zeta is the 7 and the prime might have denoted the reciprocal. But then the 10 over 71 is harder to parse, as the Greek system primarily used unit fractions. So we may first equate 10 over 71 to 1 over 8 plus 1 over 64 plus 1 over 4,544, and we can then find the values of 8, 64 and 4,544 and express each with a prime for reciprocity. So it's something like eta prime xi delta prime delta lower comma phi mu delta prime. Forgive me if I either calculated or pronounced this badly. Despite my confidence to produce nearly 50 episodes of this, I am no expert. So back to the second proposition. Now, I've not done them in the order that I've read them, because I do not believe Archimedes would have written them in that order, that being the order that Eutocius has presented them. Archimedes was insufferably rigorous, and this doesn't feel like his writing style. Here is proposition 2. The area of a circle is to the square on its diameter as 11 to 14. Now, I will save you the hard work of interpreting this. Here, he is saying that if you take the area of a circle, pi r squared, and divide it by its diameter squared, so 2r squared, you get the ratio 11 over 14. The r's can cancel, and you can multiply by the 4 to get pi equals 44 over 14, which could simplify to 22 over 7. This is the standard set for the value of pi for centuries, and it's still used to great practical effect today. You will rarely hit a real-world problem where your accuracy needs to be better than 22 over 7, to the point where some people believe that this is the real value. Just a quick side note before I forget, Archimedes would not have used the word pi for this. That honour goes to Welsh mathematician William Jones in 1706. So the reason I think that this second proposition is misplaced is that it would be unlike Archimedes to state a fact, then go on to prove it with a method of exhaustion. Placing these in the other order makes much more sense to the author, even if not to the reader. So I think a compiler or commenter, possibly even Eutocius himself, took some artistic license with this. Moreover, I'm not convinced that Archimedes would have ever stated it as an equality at all, given that he would have shown with the 96gon an upper bound of 3 and 1/7, which as a fraction is 22 over 7. But he would have also have known that this is not the least upper bound, just the point at which he chose to stop. So he would have known that the true value was strictly less than 22/7. It just seems unlikely to me. Also, a little nugget of historical complexity we see in Eutocius's commentary of this work is an approximation of the square root of 3 being bounded by 1351 over 780 and 265 over 153. But neither Archimedes or Eutocius explains where these bounds come from. It's possible that they come from the analysis of the Diophantine equation in the form x squared take away n y squared equals 1, or possibly as the convergent value of a continued fraction. But both of these techniques or strategies were only formally discussed centuries after Archimedes' time. Could this have been a later addition by Eutocius? Some mathematicians like to invent new bits of maths and have their name associated with the results. Some people like to take maths that was well known to ancient people and write their own name on it. I'm looking at you, Pell, Pascal, Newton, Snell. I could go on. If a bit of maths has the name of a white dude from the 17 to 1900s, just be a little sceptical. But other mathematicians just like to know that their maths is being used. If you were one of the latter, then your best bet is to become a commenter of earlier sources. If you could take a true master like Archimedes and be the conduit of his work, sometimes the sole conduit of his work, you could easily slip in your own discoveries and people would be more likely to pay attention. An art forger knows their work will be worth more if they write someone else's name on it. Now, I'm not saying that Eutocius did this, but we only have his word that he didn't. Another of Archimedes' work that Eutocius commented on was On the Equilibrium of Planes, which is where we see Archimedes delivering his monumental work on leverage and moments, and then applying this to 2D shapes to calculate their centres of gravity. On a quick side note here, it took me 9 years of teaching centres of gravity to bemused 16-year-olds before I learned that the term is a little misleading. I've always taught it that the centre of gravity is the point through which a line will bisect the area of a shape. Thus, if a shape is suspended from a vertex, the centre of gravity will be vertically below the point of suspension. Now, yes, you can do that with all 3 corners of a triangle, and it will work, but the statement about bisecting the area is false. What I think we should call them is a centre of moment, because the gravitational force is not simply a weight, and thus area, measurement. It also relates to the balance of horizontally displaced area across a central fulcrum. Hang on a moment. It hangs on a moment. Back to Eutocius. We believe, based on his commentaries, that Eutocius was unaware of Archimedes' work on spirals, or on the quadrature of the parabola, which I know we still have, because they are in the collected works available for purchase in English, but I cannot find the provenance of who kept these works alive. If I had to guess, it would be Tabit ibn Qurra, a tour de force of 9th century Baghdad, who definitely translated much of Archimedes' work, including the only recently rediscovered construction of a regular heptagon. But again, who can say? On that theme, Eutocius does have a few medals of honour for keeping other work alive that would have otherwise been lost, including the work of Apollonius's Conics, as well as many attempted solutions to doubling the cube by Hiero, Philo, Apollonius, Diocles, Pappus, Sporus, Menaechmus, Archytas, Eratosthenes, and Nicomachus. I include this in part because I like giving myself a long list of names to try to pronounce correctly and fluently, but also because in my script writing, I like to link together other mathematicians that have been named, and this is a lazy way of doing so. And whilst I'm giving you a peek behind of my curtain of how these episodes are produced, may I remind you that there are only 2 more shows after this one where I will stick to my regular routine of weekly on a Wednesday. After that, I will be slowing down considerably. My aim is to produce about 10 episodes in 2026. And after some contemplation and research, I think I will be choosing the option of returning to the start of recorded history, but this time following the Indian subcontinent and then following this up to the start of the Islamic Golden Age in about 800 CE. So that will be fun. Remember that this is an open invite for anyone who would like to collaborate on research and writing. If you want to have a go at writing an episode script, please get in touch. I'd very much welcome the help. Speaking of getting in touch, you can find me on Blue Sky at mathematicians-pod, where I share any of my recent project news, including my foray into sequence creation for the OEIS, as well as any silly little jokes or stories from the week. Next week, we are going to really stretch the definition of classical Hellenistic period with a mathematician who was most certainly in the early medieval period. But remember, I'm going up to the start of the Islamic Golden Age in about 800 for this section. So let's jump about 200 years and about 5,000 kilometres northwest as we discover what on earth is England and who is Bede. Let me now bid you farewell. Until then, goodbye.
The music today is Dance Macabre Finale by Kevin MacLeod. You can find more information in the show notes.